Greetings to you all. I hope that you're feeling blessed and highly favored on today. Getting right into things, I stumbled across a video on YouTube the other day as I was scouring through my timeline. And I thought it was very interesting. And I'm always interested in the opposite perspective outside of the valence or the eyes of a black man. I like to see what other races are saying or what they're experiencing and how they see some of the same occurrences that I see, and also get their take on it. But I found it very interesting that his take was very similar to one that I would have, and he had some interesting statistics to back it up also. And so without further ado, I want to go ahead and do a quick review of the video, and this is Mr. Matt Walsh. The divorce system is unjust. Let's get into it.
Well, if you've been listening to the show over the past month or so, you know that we have returned frequently to a discussion about the situation that young men face in our culture, in particular as it relates to marriage. And you know, not only if you've been listening this past week, but if you listen really at any point, that I'm a major advocate of marriage, that I especially encourage young men and women to embrace marriage and family life. But there's been a significant cultural shift away from marriage in recent years, with an increasing number of young people, men and women, giving up on the institution altogether. And for men, this shift has become its own movement with its own name. Men go their own way is what it's called. And the logic behind the movement is that our culture is hopelessly corrupted and the system is hopelessly rigged against men, and so that they're left with no choice but to give up on the system, give up on marriage, give up on the family, and strike out on their own, focusing instead on their own independence and sovereignty. As I've argued, I understand the logic. I sympathize with those who are isolated and lonely and feel that this is the only path available to them. But I don't think that surrender is the right response. A man cannot give up on what he was made to do. And
He's absolutely correct in saying this. Of course, going back to the book of Genesis, man was not intended to be alone. In fact, the Lord looked down and said that it is not good for man to be alone, in which he then gave us a helpmeet in the woman. It's just, and I have a whole teaching on this, so I'm gonna try not to get into the whole thing, man, but I got various teachings on this same subject that he's actually going into, as far as presiding over the woman the correct way, as opposed to just letting her run amok and run your life into the ground. Because if you allow them to do so, this is what the case will be. And I feel like a lot of emasculated men are turning to this particular solution that this gentleman is speaking on, simply due to the fact that they have been wounded, they've been scorned, and they have been dominated to the point to where they feel like they're better off alone, when this can be further from the truth. Let's go.
to truly go your own way, alone and isolated, is to give up on your duty, your legacy, your ancestors, your bloodline, your civilization, your happiness. The movie Into the Wild tells the story of a man, Christopher McCandless, who went his own way to the extreme, burned his social security card, left his family, hiked into the Alaskan wilderness, and he died there.
And shout out Simple too, Simple the P. He was the first one I heard that talking about that go your own way. I had never heard of it before him, and he was talking about how homosexual that sounds. I don't want to imagine a world with no women in it. Neither do I. Just a quick side note there. Let's go.
Alone, and as he was dying, he wrote in the margins of the book the words, "Happiness is only real when shared." This is one of the most essential truths of human nature. Most of us are meant to share our happiness with others. And for most of us, that's going to be with a spouse and children. All of that said, there are systemic problems with the way that we approach and govern marriages in our country.
Correct.
And it is important that we deal with and address those problems, which we usually don't. One of the central points that a great men and men have made to me is they've given feedback on the topics we've discussed on the show in recent weeks. I've read many messages like this one, just choosing this one random. It says, "Dear Matt, I absolutely agree with your message about the importance of marriage. I agree that men should become fathers and care for their families. I even generally agree with your take on Andrew Tate, but you talk about these things while never addressing these systemic issues. You push for marriage but pretend that no-fault divorce doesn't exist. Your message will fall on deaf ears as long as you refuse to acknowledge the whole picture." Now, for the record, it's definitely not even close to true that I never talk about divorce or no-fault divorce. In fact, I've been talking about it for as long as I've had a national platform to talk about these things at all. But if I'm being teed up to talk about it again, I'm happy to oblige, which is why the cancelee for our daily cancellation today is no-fault divorce. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the concept, no-fault divorce laws, first adopted by California, of course, and then by every other state in some version, allow couples to break up their marriage without any specific cause or reason. They don't need to prove that anybody was at fault.
Correct.
They simply tell the court that they don't want to be married, and that's it. Now, in some states, no-fault divorce is the only choice. An at-fault divorce is an available option in these states. In the rest of the states, no-fault is an option that can be chosen among other options. But here's perhaps the most important detail. In most situations, it only takes one spouse to file for no-fault divorce. This means that one spouse can break the marriage contract without citing any reason except irreconcilable differences, even if the other spouse doesn't consent. And this is where the gender disparity comes into play. The vast majority of divorces are initiated by women. Studies have also shown that women are more likely to get divorced after getting promoted at work.
Did a video on this also, which I'll probably pop up in the video right about now, discussing this very same issue as to how a majority of divorce is being sparked by women nowadays, and how I do an in-depth look as to what the scripture says about marriage, the beauty in marriage, and the actual vows that are taken, and how marriage was never meant to be temporary. But let's continue. Definitely feel free to check that out, because I did a great job on that, if I'm going to say so myself. Let's continue, though.
Achieving greater financial success. That's what as their financial situation improves, the likelihood of divorce becomes even more significant. Meanwhile, women are far more likely to make it out well in the divorce, receiving alimony, other forms of quote unquote spousal support. Now, in theory, gender is not supposed to factor into who gets alimony or how much they receive, but in reality, it almost always does. Even the New York Times has acknowledged this. An article last year remarking on how rare it is for women to be forced to financially support their ex-husbands reports this, quote, according to a 2019 study of census data by the Urban Institute, a nonprofit research group, half of the United States households are headed by women on average. While national statistics on alimony aren't tracked, Michael Mossberg, a New York-based lawyer and the former chairman of the American Bar Association's Family Law Section, said that despite an increase in stay-at-home husbands, far more women than men seek and receive spousal support.
Shout out to Mary J. Blige's husband. He's one of the few that actually hit on that one. Shout out to him.
So women are more and more becoming the breadwinners in their families, and yet the family court system doesn't seem to have noticed that. Alimony payments are still doled out like it's 1953. What this means is that this is what can happen. A woman can marry a man, leave him for any reason she wants, even after cheating on him,
right, and
still take half the assets and be awarded with an allowance from her ex-husband in perpetuity. It's not only outrageously unjust, but it also purposefully disincentivizes marital fidelity, incentivizing disloyalty and infidelity and divorce. There are many reforms that should be enacted to stop the bleeding here. The alimony system, for one thing, has to be drastically changed.
Agreed.
Most alimony laws were created under the assumption that most women would be housewives and they would be stay-at-home moms, and most divorces would be initiated by men who are the sole breadwinners in the family.
Right.
And in a case like that, where a man chooses to leave a wife who was staying at home to raise the kids and take care of the house,
bless me,
and he decides that he wants to leave, it makes sense that he should have to pay. She structured her entire life around the assumption that he would provide for her financially so that she can care for the children and he can go to work. If the man decides to go shack up with his secretary or whatever, he should still have to provide the support that he promised. But this doesn't describe all or even most divorces in modern America, given that, again, most divorces are initiated by women, and also most women have careers. There's no reason why a woman with a job who decides to leave her husband and break the marriage vows should then be rewarded with a monthly stipend from the man that she wants nothing to do with. I think a fairer system would require the person who destroys the marriage to pay regardless of the gender. And yeah, can it be difficult to decide who's at fault for destroying the marriage? Yeah, it's difficult, but that's what needs to happen. This is why these courts exist, to make these determinations. And if the divorce really is a mutual decision, which I mean almost never really is, but if that's what they're claiming, then neither should expect an allowance from the other if they both have mutually decided this. But I think the reform to no-fault divorce is far simpler. It should be reformed by simply ceasing to exist. Marriage is much more than a contract. It's a covenant. But to the extent that it is also...
Bingo. Well said. Of course, I didn't watch this whole thing, so that's the first time I heard him say that, but you're absolutely correct, my boy.
A contract? It's hard to think of any other situation in which a contract can be broken for no reason by either party without...
I gotta say this as well, but this is one of my biggest things. If because I also go into that in another teaching to where I say, who stamped marriage? The covenant before the eyes of the Lord. He's the one who ordains this relationship or this covenant, as he put it. Where did this contract with public officials, where did this come into play at, to where we had to be legally recognized and to actually make it a business? Where does this come into play, and how does this fall into the rankings of us being married? Because if you truly understand what it is to be married, then baby, we are already married. We don't, without a paper or no paper, as long as we are renewing these vows to each other daily before the sight of God, we are already married. But this is, I guess, in today's time, in this particular culture, we have to have papers that acknowledge us as married or we not married. So I just wanted to add that in there right quick. Let's go.
Consent of the other, and entirely without cause. It's hard to think of any other contract that would work that way. But by treating marriage this way, we have downgraded the marital contract to something less binding than like the agreement you have with your cell phone carrier. We've made it into something cheap and worthless.
Correct.
And that's how it's therefore treated.
Man,
when you make divorce easy, and for at least one party concerned profitable, you get more of it. In fact, shockingly, when you make divorce easier and more profitable for one sex at the expense of the other, you get a greater number of the members of that sex initiating divorces. You don't need a crystal ball to predict an outcome like this.
All right.
People respond to incentives. If you incentivize disloyal, selfish behavior, you get more of it. However, if you make divorce difficult and potentially costly for everybody involved, not for one spouse, but both, then you've given couples an incentive to find another solution for their supposedly irreconcilable differences. And you've sent a message on a cultural level that the marital vow is meaningful and important and not something that can be just discarded on a whim. Now, no-fault divorce advocates will argue that the alternative, divorce without the no-fault option, can tend to be traumatic and it can get really ugly. But there's no way around it, and we shouldn't look for one.
All right.
Like, divorce is an ugly thing, no matter what. A promise was made, a vow was...
And that's also in the teaching idea. Y'all should definitely go check that out. Divorce was never meant to be. The scripture said, I'm not going to go into the whole teaching, man. Go check that video out. But the Pharisees actually came at Jesus and asked him. They trying to tie him up, tangle and twist him up like they normally used to try to, and he used to have to outwit him and smack them all upside the head verbally. But they asked him, so was Moses wrong for ordaining divorce? And the Lord came back with such a witty response, and he stated that he tolerated divorce, but it was never sanctioned. It was never correct before the eyes of the Lord. Even so, unto the point to where if a man divorces his wife and she goes on to be with another man, you guys have committed adultery. But that's another story for another day. Go check the video out. I'm gonna leave a link here in the description.
Made, now it's being broken. That's an ugly thing. There's no way to make this ugly thing not ugly. Besides, no-fault divorce doesn't mitigate the trauma or ugliness of divorce. Instead, too often, it simply shifts the trauma so that one party is made to carry most of its burden. And that is the problem. And for that reason, and so many others, no-fault divorce is, or should be, fair.
Great points made by the gentleman here. And shout out to you for that video. I'm gonna tag in and let you know I'm doing a review of your joint, man. You know, even though we just a baby channel, we just a small channel, man. I think you'll like some of the points that I brought up in this particular video. But yeah, like I said, I'm always interested in other intellectuals, especially in other races and this, that, and the third, to where I can actually see what's going on with them and how they view some of the same experiences or some of the same things that I'm viewing. And especially, see, he looks more conservative. He looks as if, well, especially with some of the things that he said, I know he's kind of looking at things from a biblical standpoint. And so I definitely rock with him for that. And yeah, there's a few things that he left out that, you know, that I kind of got my own twist and my own beliefs on, which of course I specified. And again, you know, I appreciate his opinion on the topic. I think it was well thought out and very well said. So shout out to him for that. But of course, we'll leave everything there. Jump in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think concerning the whole situation and the institution of marriage as a whole. And as far as divorce goes, let me know what you guys think. And of course, until the next time, everyone under the sound of my voice, certainly be blessed.